Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. Today, we are looking at a repeated question that arises in geopolitics regarding the relevance of Quad. So, just to refresh the memory of our listeners, the origins of the Quad date back to 2004 from a disaster relief operation carried out by India, Japan, Australia, and the US in an informal arrangement. In 2007, the grouping was given a political shape through the quadrilateral security dialogue, right? And as strategic priorities diverged, the grouping gradually lost momentum after that. But it was revived again in 2017, faced with the rising challenge of Chinese dominance in the Indo Pacific. The four countries revived the Quad and broadened its objectives. And recently, the Quad has resurfaced in the headlines for the past few weeks. In late May, the foreign ministers of the US, India, Japan, and Australia gathered in New Delhi for the 11th meeting. Days later, at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, the Quad came up again when a question was asked directly to the Japanese defense minister about the grouping's direction and ambitions. And yet, the same questions that surrounded the Quad remain as they have always been. How relevant is the Quad? Is it doing enough? And in what direction is the grouping headed? So, I am Bhumika Sevakani, a research analyst at the Takshila Institution. And to answer these questions and understand the grouping better, I am joined by my colleague Amit Kumar, staff research analyst with the Geostrategy program at Takshila. Welcome, Amit.
Thank you so much, Bhumika. Thanks for having me.
Right, Amit. So, just to start off from the very beginning, the Quad has, again, as I mentioned, had back-to-back visibility in these two events, and the criticism has not gone away despite all of this momentum, right? And the main criticism being that the grouping is too soft, it won't name China, and it is not a real security architecture, right? So, how do you perceive this criticism?
Thank you so much, Bhumika. So, as I look, uh, according to me, right, there are three broad criticisms that Quad faces. And over time, these have been very consistent and very recurrent, as you said, right? The first one is, as you said, uh, Quad, there is a reluctance. There are three reluctances, I would say, right? Reluctance to name China, reluctance to project itself as a security grouping, and reluctance to cooperate on security issues, that is, cooperating or overwhelming focus on non-security soft issues. So these are the three broad pillars or three broad criticism that Quad continues to face. Now, of course, now the first criticism as to with regards to reluctance to name China, I think that is a normative criticism, and I would say that I don't quite have a problem with that criticism. I mean, with that reluctance to name China in the Quad, because because if the intended and the critics argue that if the intended objective of Quad is to shape the balance of power in Indo-Pacific, it cannot do so without naming China. But if you look on the other side, positioning itself as an anti-China platform or an anti-China uh, forum, I mean, it would dissuade countries or discourage countries from associating itself with Quad. And that is certainly something that the Quad countries do not want. I mean, if the Quad has to survive and has to emerge as a credible alternative uh, and challenge the Chinese aggression in the region and shape the balance of power, it will require partners, and it will require countries to uh, partner with them without hesitating, right? And if that has to, and China is a big power in the region. I mean, China has a lot of leverage. China has shown the willingness to coerce smaller countries. So they're right in hesitating. They'll be right in hesitating to cooperate or associate with Quad if it is outrightly projected as an anti-China forum. So I think that is a very strategic call, and I think that makes sense. The second criticism with regards to not positioning itself as a security centric forum, right? I mean, this criticism holds, and you can argue either ways, and well, as and when we go forward in the conversation, we'll discuss it, right? But yes, there is I mean, the criticism is that they do not uh, if again, if the logic is to balance balance the I mean, shape the balance of power in the region, you ought to do things like uh, LEMOA that India had, the logistics agreements that India had with the US, things like COMCASA, BECA on communications, etc., right? Integrating and military domains, right? Things like that, or joint patrolling. Even though the Quad countries, mind you, they individually, not under the aegis of Quad, they do conduct joint patrolling and joint exercises. Malabar being one. Under the aegis of Quad, is it's not something that the Quad countries do. So that's the second kind of criticism, and then we'll go into whether this stands or not. Third is again the criticism is that they cooperate on largely issues which are, I mean, Quad should not, and this is what even Tanvi Madan had said, in that Quad doesn't have to be another UN, right? It does not have to cooperate on things like health, education, and stuff like that. This is not what Quad was. The origins of Quad, the genesis of Quad, was rooted in, and this is not what Quad was meant to be. It meant to do. It is supposed to do certain hard security stuff that can, put a credible challenge to China. So these are the three major criticism that I think Quad faces, and whether these challenges hold and how true is, of course, we can discuss going forward.
No, right. I think your point on actively not naming China helps the member states cooperate better is absolutely right. And but then you also mentioned other criticisms, right? Specifically on how critics say that Quad talks security, but it focuses more on the soft issues. And you can see that with no mutual defense clause, or again, as you mentioned, all the different areas of cooperation that it works more on, right? But how much of that criticism can be verified with actual data? So Amit, you've recently published a dashboard that tracks Quad's cooperation initiatives, right? So from that data, what would you say, how much of these criticisms hold true?
See, that's a relevant question, and that was the point of making this dashboard. So when the foreign ministers met in New Delhi for their 11th meeting and announced a series of measures, so the question was, okay, every time Quad leaders meet, they announce a series of measures and initiatives, and we have been party to that for quite some time now. But what happens to those initiatives, and where are they cooperating? Yes, there have been accusations and defenses from both sides, critics and defenders, that okay, Quad is doing this, Quad is not doing that. So, but to there was a need to look at it more closely, and therefore this dashboard. And when I did, Quad began its journey. It's in its new form in 2017, right? But there was a lull of about 4 years. There was nothing. Even though the grouping was revived, there was nothing concrete or tangible deliverables that came out of Quad, right? And it was only after and during pandemic that the Quad held its first ever leaders summit, that was in virtual form in March 2021, which was soon followed by another this time in-person meeting between the leaders of the Quad countries in September 2021. And the first concrete, I would say, the measures that we saw only came in 2021, the first in virtual summit. And since then, the list has grown. Today, if you track all the initiatives, and this is what the dashboard does, it tracks every single initiative that has been announced, that was announced by Quad since March 2021. And the list today has grown to about 37 initiatives, is what I have been able to track. Would love to hear from our listeners if there anything that I missed out on. But 37 lists so far. And in that, what I did was categorize these initiatives into about 5 domains, because this largely all these initiatives were falling into one of these 5 domains. So one was security related, then you had climate, you had health, infrastructure, and one on education exchange. And to my surprise, what I found out was, 23 of these, or about 23, over 60%, right, of these initiatives were security related initiatives. So that's, I mean, and I mean, in traditional sense, this would not be very you would not call it security. Like, again, as I said, it would not have initiatives like logistics agreements or mutual defense, things like those. But even if you look at the types of cooperation, the subdomains of cooperation, so there are about 7 initiatives related to critical and emerging technology, 5 related to maritime, and about another 5 related to communication. That would be your space, cyber, or sea cables, right? And these are 3 key areas where you would, when you see the China challenge, they're likely to emanate from these 3 domains, right? Maritime challenge, China's maritime challenge is something which is very much talked about, and this is something that we need to address. There's the whole point of China's aggression or military aggression in South China Sea, Indo-Pacific, is about maritime, and the Quad is what the focus of Quad was maritime, right? So of course, maritime is one security related area. Second would be technology, right? Critical and emerging technologies, and as we see in the past 5 years, technology has emerged as a central node of geopolitical competition, right? This is the domain where geopolitical contestation is being fought between China and the US, and the fight is over who controls these critical and emerging technologies. So, if the Quad countries are cooperating on issues of critical and emerging technologies, I would say that's a security related initiative, right? And then comes to your secure communications. You need to have secure communications, and given Chinese dominance again in this area, with the capability of 5G, 6G, uh, other forms of cellular modules, right? Then capabilities with regards to sea cables, etc. So Chinese, and this is something that, and Chinese have done carried out certain suspicious activities in these domains, and therefore, if the Quad countries are cooperating in these domains, I would say that's a security related initiative, and rightly so. Uh, and therefore, and if you look at other initiatives or cooperation in other domains, it is followed by, I think, infrastructure, then you have health, and then some initiatives in climate, and one in education exchange. But what is important, the important key takeaway is that it's incorrect to say that Quad does not focus on security related issues. And that's the second criticism that we talked about at the beginning of our conversation. That one of the thing is, a related criticism, both second and third, that Quad doesn't position itself as a security related platform, which is fine. But on the third criticism, that it doesn't focus on, or the Quad doesn't give importance to security related initiatives, I think that would be incorrect assessment. Now, what is important is that while they cooperate on these domains, the type of cooperation, there are other, this is a first level or first order assessment that we have done. But whether we need to also look at things like, what are the type of cooperation that is happening in these domains? What is the funding? Have you backed it with substantial funding, or your initiatives being backed by the right amount of funding, etc. So we can go into that. But yeah, it would be incorrect to say that Quad does not focus on security related issues. That would be a big takeaway.
All right. So I think this gives us an insight on the difference in perception about how you'd say how you'd perceive cooperation in security vis-a-vis vis-a-vis the domains of contestation between and that involve China, right? All of the domains that you mentioned, that sort of are emerging concerns in in the region, right? So, but and I would urge our listeners to sort of visit the dashboard. We'll be linking it in the description below, and share more insights if you find any trends in that, right? So, coming to trends, Amit, if you were to identify a trend from there, how do you then see the nature of cooperation in Quad, and where does it really sit
Hmm.
between just being a talk shop to actually being a security alliance, and how have the cooperation initiatives sort of performed from what was initially stated in their objectives?
Okay, so by nature of cooperation, again, as I said, continuing from the previous question and linking that to your question, the nature of cooperation. Now, on one hand, you would see that yes, the Quad is cooperating on security issues, but again, as I said, the nature of cooperation may also matter. So, if you look at what are the type of in these particular domains, if 23 of the 37 initiatives are related to security, you might also want to know, I mean, you cannot stop there. You have to do a second order assessment as to what are the types of cooperation that the Quad countries are doing in these domains, right? And that is where again the criticism gains some sort of I mean credibility, and the defenders might lose out on, right? Because if you look at the type of cooperation, now there are a few types of cooperation that you can have, right, in these 23 domains: interoperability, capacity building, supply chain resilience, standard setting, data sharing, monitoring, and relief. Now, interoperability and capacity building are the ones which dominate, but there are similar types of cooperation. If you look at interoperability, monitoring, data sharing, and to an extent relief, these are very closely related kinds of cooperation where you are trying to boost uh, integration. Gain integration. Like if you do shared monitoring, shared data, do data sharing. If you do interoperability exercises, etc., it boosts your integration with the four economies of the four countries. Now, in very purely, if these were to happen in military spheres, this would be a proper uh, military to military cooperation or hard security cooperation. Like again, I go back to the example of Lemoa, Becca, Comcasa, and Sysmoa, right? So these are also data sharing, uh, interoperability, and monitoring, and to an extent, shared monitoring, right? Exercises. But these largely fall in the domain of military, hard military spheres. Here, what even though they're doing interoperability, data sharing, and monitoring, these are largely civilian, non-military grade or civilian applications. So even though in space they might be doing monitoring exercises, joint monitoring, data sharing, interoperability, operability exercises, etc., or in maritime, these will be largely those capacities would largely cater to civilian application and non-grade military things. So here you could say that although they are cooperating security domains, the nature of cooperation is largely civilian, right? And that's a valid criticism, and this is what I learned from when I created this dashboard. But you also need to remember that these capabilities, when you do integration through interoperability exercises or data monitoring or data sharing, right? This might be at the outset a civilian integration of infrastructure and the capacities, but these can have dual use applications. And within a second and within a moment, these can translate into you can use it for military purposes as well. If you're if there is a joint monitoring capability, that capability that exists among four countries, joint space or joint cyber capability that exists, it can obviously be used also for military purposes. So yes, at the outset, this is what the Quad is doing, but you need to also remember that they are quickly those capabilities can be transferred into military domains as well. So yes and no. The answer to that, when you look at the nature of cooperation, yes and no. I think they are being very implicit in not acknowledging, but these capabilities, I'm very sure, will also aid military capabilities as and when required if there's the need arises at some point, right? And then getting on to the question of performances. And yes, if you look at the performances of these initiatives, yes, I would say in security related domains, maritime is one subdomain which has performed really well, because you tend to compare. I mean, to come to assess their performances, what one can do is to compare the tangibles which have been delivered under those initiatives and what were the initial targets that were mentioned. If you limit your assessment to these, uh, you'd say that maritime cooperation, in the domain of maritime cooperation, they have done really well. There are other areas such as critical and emerging tech. Okay, that's also been largely satisfactory, but we'll have to see, and you'll also have to see the funding mechanisms, because building capacity and building supply chain resilience will also be very critical to boosting or the security nature, or will decide how securitized quad is, because these will be the domains where you'll have contestation with China. So on that, I think there's still work to be done, because we haven't seen a lot of funding on those areas, except for the $20 billion commitment or pledge, mobilization pledge, that was made by the four countries at the 11th Foreign Ministers meeting recently in Delhi. But largely, yes, it has been on maritime and critical emerging, I would say that they have been largely satisfactory.
Right. So, the insights that you provided on the nature of cooperation, right? I mean, I think it is also sort of important in order to move this way, in order to avoid attracting unnecessary attention from China, right? And the capabilities can be switched whenever needed, right? But moving to the funding aspect that you mentioned, from the data, we see that security does dominate the agenda in 23 of the 37 initiatives, but health and climate are receiving greater funding, right? They dominate the funding that comes from the Quad. But so is that a structural contradiction, or is there a logic to it as similar to that, in that being justified in the nature of cooperation?
See, yes. So funding again was a critical determinant in assessing how these how I would say serious the Quad is towards these initiatives, right? If you track the money, you will always find some answers, right? And therefore, there was an effort towards tracking uh, the funding, the which are the initiatives that are being funded and not. And yes, if you look at the numbers, it presents a very different story. Health leads with, they have invested, or they have, the commitment since 2021 has been about to the tune of $9.1 billion in aid and grant, and loans about $3.5 billion, right? Compare that to security, $0.22 billion of aid and grant. That's all, right? So yes, the Quad's security focus, when you see, calculate the security related initiatives as a percentage of its total initiatives, you don't quite get. It is not matched by the funding commitment or the funding pattern. So health obviously gets a lot. Uh, Climate also has gotten more funding than security, and the reason behind this stark contrast is the Quad vaccine partnership that happened and the pandemic. So the Quad countries donated a lot of vaccines. There's a lot of grant and aid that they committed to different agencies. There was a plan to provide and donate 1.2 billion doses across the world, because some of the most poor and vulnerable countries might not have access to vaccines, right? They did not succeed in donating about 1.2, but they donated somewhere between 400 million to 500 million doses. And so that was one. So, and because of that, a lot of commitment, the funding commitment was made towards vaccines. And there's another initiative called Cancer Moonshot Initiative, right? And even towards that commitment, they have towards that initiative, they have committed a lot of money, and that shows in the numbers. And yes, and the other reason why security, so this is one reason. So pandemic was one of the reasons why the numbers for health is so high. Another reason for security, that you do not have a huge chunk of money that you see in the graphs, is because most of the nature of a corporation is such where you want to do interoperability, data monitoring, data sharing, standard setting. Standard setting is something which I didn't talk about, but there are five. It is also one of the major types of cooperation that the Quad does in the security related domains. That's to set standards, right? And then so these are the kind of things that they do in the security related domain. Now, these are the things that do not need a dedicated funding or a dedicated line of financial commitment that has to be made. You just integrate the systems and whatever administrative cost will be there. That's not something which is disclosed usually. If you're carrying out interoperability or data sharing or integrating your systems with their systems, yes, that would require some money, but that will largely be administrative money or things like those, right? So those would not be huge numbers that you would see in the uh, data. So that is one reason why you might not have huge numbers for security. They'll largely be hidden, right? Because these wouldn't be huge numbers. Second, on the issue of capacity building and supply chain resilience, where you have to build capacity and build resilient supply chain, here you actually have to spend money. You can't do that, and you need to see a tangible funding amount to, because I like critical minerals thing, right? You want to create a resilient supply chain, you'll have to commit money, and that's what they did. They haven't committed it. They've said that they have pledged, and they have said that they'll mobilize this much in the coming years towards this initiative. So we need to see more of those initiatives, because capacity building and supply chain resilience are the two major uh, types of, not only types of cooperation, but also will be critical to countering China's dominance in the region. And if in those areas you want to counter the Chinese, and do not forget the capacity building and supply chain resilience largely fall under the category of critical and emerging tech and secure communications, and to an extent maritime. Again, three major areas where you're likely to see contestation of the China happen in the coming years. So you'll need money for that. So, to an extent, I can understand the security initiatives do not reflect huge amounts because of the kind of cooperation that they're undertaking. But then you also have things like capacity building and building resilient supply chains, which require commitment, huge financial commitment to happen. So again, something that Quad needs to put money where its mouth is.
Right. Regarding that, you just mentioned, right, there was a $20 billion, I think, announcement for the critical minerals target. But again, so far we have not seen that initiative come to fruition, right, about securing the supply chains. But to sum it up, Amit, in the current context with ever increasing dominance of China in these domains and the geopolitical uncertainty surrounding the US and its actions as well, how do you think that the Quad will move going ahead? In what direction do you think will it be moving going ahead? And what would be needed to make this security agenda more credible on paper and in practice?
See, I would say that Quad is still a very young institution. It will take time. You can't expect it to behave like Five Eyes. It takes time to build trust. And, Donald Trump has done a lot of harm, whether it is transatlantic partnership, India-US partnership with its allies. They're all, worried about it. And it has taken back some of the things that Quad achieved. May have pushed things backwards in that sense. But I want to reiterate that Quad is still a very young institution, and it will take time to build trust, especially the kind of complex relations that India has with a lot of other partners that the West is not quite comfortable with. Russia and Iran being two examples. But and they also have apprehensions about things getting normalized between India and China. So India shares complex relationships, and therefore trust building will take time. And this is how you also climb the ladder of cooperation. You do the most basic things and foundational stuff. So what Quad is doing in the domain of say health or even the security related initiatives, and the kind of cooperation that they're undertaking in those domains are the most fundamental, the basics that you need to do before migrating to or elevating your relationship to a more hard security focus kind of a platform to elevate Quad into that kind of a platform. So you will need these kind of things and these kind of things to be normalized first before migrating to that sort of cooperation that you expect Quad to be. So I think give it some time, and I think slowly. And obviously, you have Trump, who has there have been some damages done to the partnerships overall, not just Quad. And but I'm sure with time, if you need to give it time, it's still a young uh, grouping. And they're cooperating on the most fundamental basic things that you require to build trust on before migrating onto those hard security elevated stuff that we want to do. So I'm hopeful that Quad will get there, and it's the genesis of Quad, the fact that it is rooted in the dangers that emanate from rise of China. I think that will keep it a cohesive grouping, and they'll only expand in cooperating and integrating more domains of cooperation as they go forward.
Right. No, I think those were some interesting thoughts on what Quad needs to do in terms of continued trust building around these initiatives as well. Right. So, right. Thank you. Thank you, Amit, for sharing your insights with us. And I think it also sort of clears some clouds around understanding the Quad and its future direction. So, yeah, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. And I hope our listeners also enjoyed this episode.
Thank you so much. Love being here.
Thank you, and tune in for the next episode.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.